Today, I'd like to offer some thoughts under the title, Where the Heaven is God. Where the Heaven is God. I could have offered up a title containing the commonly thought of metaphysical opposite of heaven, H-E double hockey sticks. But in preference to avoiding crass verbiage, I chose heaven. I also was recently in heaven, in a place where there was zero light pollution, and you could see the Milky Way stretch end to end like transparent, dangling silk. 4 of Jupiter's moons visible with simple birding binoculars, the shining stars mysteriously even brighter when you looked at them indirectly, just out of the corner of your eye, averted vision. This heavenly view of the heavens happened to be up in Vermont during part of my family's summer Sabbath, and I hope you've all had such moments in your life to see such heavenly Buena Vistas before. It's stunning. Awe and wow fall way short. We know of forest bathing. This most certainly was star bathing. And such a vista puts us in our place, feeling both minuscule and welcomed at the same time. Super insignificant compared to supernovas, mysteriously, somehow, part of it all. Perhaps it's that stardust from within us that makes up our very being, singing out in solidarity, glimpsing their cosmic cousins billions of miles away. But on that particular night, star, dark, binged blessing, the thought came to me, one that I'm sure also came to my early teenage self when in a similar neck-strained view. Where up there is God? No, really, where is she? Where? It hit me in a new way, unlike those teenage years. God's not there. Not out there in the still rushing to expand universe with more stars than grains of sand on Earth, including ocean's depths. Not somewhere behind the cosmic veil, seated on a throne or even on a non-hierarchical heavenly yoga mat. God's not up there, out there. God's not anywhere. While the cosmic sky is incredible and filled with wonder and divine design and joy, this thought hit me. I couldn't see God, and I couldn't see where God might be. And perhaps it was the news that I had been doing so well to avoid for most of those summer Sabbath weeks. Where the heaven is God? And we've certainly heard this question in its more appropriately crass form lifted in so many places in recent weeks. God, where are you? Are you in the chaotic crush of bodies madly scrambling to slip past Taliban checkpoints and scale unscalable airport walls in Kabul? God, where are you? Are you in the rubble of yet another massive earthquake in Haiti, and that sacred land previously made more unstable with that presidential assassination? God, where are you? Are you in the hurricane with the painfully ironic name of Grace that made post-earthquake Haiti more like hell? God, where are you? Are you in the first ever recorded raindrops that are falling at 10,000 feet in Greenland's climate-changing ice sheets? God, where are you? As tornadoes and hurricanes, tropical storms hover even here in New England. God, where the heaven are you? I wonder if Solomon ever asked this very same question. Second born to a king, brought into this world in the shadow of sin. Solomon's father David having forcefully, #MeToo, taken Bathsheba from her husband, who he then later had killed in the front lines of battle, had a firstborn together, Solomon's older sibling. But this unnamed child in the text then quickly dies as a punishment for David's adulterous violence, which brings us to the second-born of Bathsheba and David, Solomon, whose name means peace, a name lifted as a sign of God's forgiveness against David's many sins. In the wake of it all, Solomon becomes the third and final monarch of a unified kingdom of Israel. While clearly born into privilege and then blessed by God with wisdom, and by his military and market-based exploits, wealth, Solomon still operates under the shadow of the sins of his ancestors, and like his father, is no stranger to the perpetuation of violence and exploitation. So I wonder if he ever uttered, "Where in the heaven are you, God?" Perhaps in moments of quiet calm and reflection during his starry night gazing equivalents, looking beyond the trappings of wealth and privilege around him, perhaps he asked that question, "Where is God?" Remember that Solomon is the one who asks God to be filled with the gift of wisdom. And tradition, rather than scholars, link him to the Proverbs. As we heard Reverend Joshua preach about last week, Lady Wisdom seems to take up residence in Solomon, another bad creation. Joshua's sermon is online. You can take it in like I did if you were away last week. And from this place of wisdom, I can't imagine Solomon every now and again not recognizing his own limitations, his own misgivings, his own questionings about what was behind the inheritances from his ancestors. With wisdom comes the ability to ask good questions. And at its roots, I think, where is God in the face of injustice and pain is a very wise question. For underlying it is an unsettledness with the status quo, an unwillingness to accept that God can be okay with suffering. Behind the question, where is God, is the clarity that injustice and pain are not where we want ourselves or our neighbors to nest. The text doesn't say this, but I wonder if one reason why Solomon takes up the baton passed by his father to complete the building of the temple there in Jerusalem is out of an effort to help answer this very question. Where is God? Right here, right now, in this place, a place cosmic in size and golden in grandeur, a temple unparalleled to house the Ark of the Covenant, that sacred box that told of the sacred relationship that God has with their people, a house to house God. In today's text from 1 Kings chapter 8, read by Rich, we hear the prayer of dedication that Solomon offers during the unveiling of this shiny new architectural wonder. While most scholars would insist this suddenly pious and upright voice of Solomon must certainly be a sign of later redaction by the Deuteronomistic editors, and I tend to agree, such a voice is one that is filled with wisdom, and so it fits his God-given gifts. While building the structure to house the ark and so craft a place to encounter the divine, Solomon is quick to pray, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Even heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, much less this house that I have built." From the very origins of the temple cult, the highest levels of Israel's leadership make it clear that no structure can contain God. And more specifically, nothing can contain God, not even the highest heavens. Maybe it was Solomon's wisdom then behind why I couldn't see God dwelling up there in that beautiful starry sky last week. God is not constrainable, but still we long to find God, especially when our worlds are shaken and falling apart. Perhaps then the question, where the heaven is God, becomes an instruction to build something, to build a dwelling place. For when we build something, when we create something, when we bring something into being, things happen. Solomon builds the temple to be a house of prayer. The Hebrew word for prayer is used more in this chapter of 1 Kings chapter 8 than anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. The temple is not something to be worshiped, but a place where humans can come to pray, and then, in order to find a tangible community, something happens. This place, this temple, is a visible reminder of the presence of God. And coming into that place, a wild diversity of people come to pray, and in so doing bump into each other. And now this is a sign, I believe, of Solomon's wisdom. If you notice the passage that Rich read for us this morning, there are some things and certain verses that the Common Revised Lectionary leave out from this chapter, mainly for the sake of being able to fit into a worship service on a Sunday morning. But in these left out verses, more details emerge from Solomon that give specific occasions where people are to come to the temple to pray. He writes that where there is a need for reconciliation between neighbors, where there is a national defeat in battle, where there is a drought or a famine or a plague, or when a foreigner shows up, these are occasions to come to the temple to pray. Now, we heard some lines in this reading about foreigners, including the supplication that when a foreigner comes and prays toward the temple, God will not only hear this prayer, but act in response to whatever is asked. Now, this is radical. These are foreigners, these are Gentiles, these are non-Jews at a time where the centrality of the temple was representing something different. Solomon is making it clear in this prayer that foreigners are not only to be welcomed, but listened to, as their prayers are just as sacred as his own people's prayers. Their longings, our longings. Solomon here has created a dwelling place labeled as a dwelling place for God, and one that becomes an international, multiracial crossroads for people who in their hearts are asking, where the heaven is God? I wonder if they might begin to find answers to this question as they bump into each other, as they listen to each other, as they set up markets and hostels to feed and house one another, as they commune with one another. Psalm 84, that we use as our prayer for grounding and assurance this morning, describes this, perhaps more often than not, chaotic gathering as beautiful. How lovely is your dwelling place, O God. Biblical scholars classify this psalm as one of the songs of Zion, a pilgrim's outpouring of praise and awe upon arriving at the temple in Jerusalem. After a long and challenging journey, we can imagine the deep sense of relief and gratitude at being able to be met by God with one's deep inner longing to commune and communicate and be listened to by the Holy One of Israel. We can conjure the image of the impossibility and relief of safely arriving at Kabul's airport and finding a flight out. This psalm says that even the sparrows somehow find their way into the rafters of that sanctuary temple and peacefully nest there and raise their young. Their bird song becomes praise at the altar of their Creator, at the altar of our Creator. So there seems Solomon's wisdom embedded in building something, creating something, not just for the sake of bringing something lovely into the world, though we could all stand more beauty in these days, but for the sake of creating a vessel, a container, a reason for gathering. People and birds alike coming together in praise only because trees and stones have given up their natural setting in the cause of becoming a so-called temple. No more sacred, of course, than their original cedar stands in Lebanon or granite outcroppings in Palestine, but sacred nonetheless in their new coming together. This is not a call for each of us, friends, to strike out and create a new sanctuary like this one here at 67 Newbury Street. This is not a backdrop to my Zoom. This is real. I am here, and this place misses you. It's not a call for us to build our own, though our faithful building committee members and all those supporting both the Renew the Light and Reframe the Light campaigns are most certainly builders and sustainers of this sacred sanctuary. But this is, I would say, an invitation to create something. It could be crafting a sacred space from which you are currently Zooming, carefully selecting a candle or a tapestry or a wall hanging to accompany your Zoom sanctuary. It could be cultivating a garden in the place where you live. There's so many other things it could be, but obviously during this pandemic, it's an extra challenge to create spaces that physically bring people together. But equally, as we have seen during this past year and a half, countless creative responses have sprung up to foster community in response to injustice. The writing of prayers, of litanies, of poems, the joining of Bible studies or book discussions, volunteering where it's safe, cooking a meal for your child or your neighbor. There are countless ways, big and small, to create. And let me be clear, some of us have absolutely no additional capacity to imagine something new. Of course you don't. You have been parenting during a pandemic. You have been going through treatments. You are accompanying others who are. You are caring for aging parents. You are working what seems like endless hours to contribute something meaningful at work. As a dear colleague reminded me this past week, we are all working through an extended period of collective anxiety. For some of us, therefore, turning off the news cycles is actually the form of creating something new. Sacred space, slowing down just a bit to think, to feel, to breathe. This is indeed creating something by saying no to other things. And for those of us in this place, remember too, you are part of a collective whole. You are a part of a greater whole as a part of this community of faith at Church of the Covenant. We are connected to mission co-workers in Haiti and NGOs in Afghanistan right now who are doing the work of accompaniment. For some of us, simply knowing this is enough. For others, reaching out with financial support and prayer or more active forms of advocacy for those people and with those people may be a way to bring something new into life. I think at its roots, the form of prayer that Solomon envisions will take place at this newly dedicated temple is a form of solidarity, a form of connection. It may seem arbitrary, it may seem insignificant, but such things are essential. In the face of injustices, we set up structures, physical sanctuaries, liturgical happenings, communal gatherings that remind us to pray and make space for solidarity. When I graduated from seminary down the street this way at Boston University School of Theology, the keynote speaker at my graduation was none other than Hamid Karzai, the then newly elected president of Afghanistan, the person for whom the Kabul airport is currently named. The same person who has been meeting this past week with Taliban leaders in hopes of reducing violence and establishing some form of a smooth transition of power. He spoke this at that graduation. When you see on the news or read in the newspaper that so many people were killed in places far off, do not let these numbers become mere abstractions to you. These are real people like you and I. They are families, friends, they have pain, they have grief. We must not turn away when we hear the cries of the hungry. Every time we ignore the suffering of others or stand by and watch, we do not act against our own interests, but we violate a part of our humanity. He went on to say, your generation will be judged on indifference to hunger, to poverty, and misery in the world unless you seize opportunities to make a difference. As you commence a new beginning today, take with you my warmest congratulations. I urge you to fight poverty, to build bridges, in other words, to uphold our common humanity. Hamid Karzai, like Solomon, invites us to make space across difference, to see our mutual createdness, and I would add, to see the face of God in one another. While I didn't see the face of God somehow poised behind those stars up in that Vermont heavenly sky, I did feel God's presence. For under that panoply of distant suns, I gathered with a few friends, including one of my beloved nephews, now in college. And the wonder and awe that came from the galaxy inspired us to have the wonder and awe for one another in our conversation, and there was indeed light kindled among us as a deeply nourishing conversation was born. Something new emerged. Something was created from our coming together under that temple of sacred space above us. Sacred space emerged among us. And in the faces of one another, there, the heaven was God. There, the heaven is God. Thanks be to God. Amen.